Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. I'm Alex McCutcheon from UNICOM. We're delighted to be hosting today's webinar. Just to explain, UNICOM is a training and events company. Amongst other events, one of our conferences is the DevOps Summit, which takes place in London and also in Amsterdam. It's next taking place on the 14th of November. The website for that is devopssummit.com. We're delighted particularly to introduce today's webinar. The theme is something that very closely relates to DevOps. Title today of the webinar is Release Automation 101, All the Fundamentals You Need to Know. Our presenter today is Benny van der Sompler from CA Technologies. Benny is a release automation expert and also an early soft fellow at CA Technologies who has over 15 years of experience in bringing innovation and software solutions to enterprises. So what I'd like to do is, at this point, hand over to Benny and let you know also that at the end of the webinar we will be having opportunity for questions and discussion. So Benny, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Alec, for the introduction. So thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to take you through some of the concepts, that we have in use when we talk about release automation and concepts like continuous delivery. Myself, as Alex said, I'm coming from the NolioSoft company, a company which was acquired by CA, by Computer Associates, a couple of months ago. And myself, I have been for over 3 years active in automating release deployment operations across the entire release lifecycle. So what I have in mind is to use a couple of slides to explain and articulate the concepts that we stand for, and then if time permits, I'll give you also a quick overview in the product, how it looks for an end user who might want to run a deployment in a particular environment, as well as how you need to set this up and design this, so more for the expert users. So more of that at the end of the webinar session. Now, so let's dive into it. So when we talk about application release deployment operations that we automate, it means that what we actually do for our customers is that we help them to set up a platform, a very well-oiled platform, where various development teams can put their releases, their builds that they have produced, well, they can put them into the platform, and the platform will help them to automate not only the deployment of those new builds and releases in one single environment, but it will also help them to then promote that release from the first stage in the release lifecycle up to the next one, up to the deployments you need to do in your QA environments, in your integration environments, up to UAT, pre-production, and directly into the production environment. And for a couple of customers, we have actually been able to automate that such that when development teams are putting up a new release here at the beginning of the release lifecycle, that a couple of hours later, that change is already live in production. Not by skipping all the steps that you need to do, but by really automating every step along the release lifecycle, and by reducing that idle time that you see quite often between the various steps in the release lifecycle. So that's the automation that we are talking about. And along that release lifecycle, there are of course already many different tools that you might be using. I'm quite sure many of you will be using all kind of release management tools or ALM tools. You might have some source control tools as well as build tools that you might be using, like Hudson, Jenkins, TeamCity, whatever. Various test automation platforms, or even the repositories where you store your artifacts in. So the goal with release automation is not to replace those tools that you use there, but to actually integrate them all into a single platform, such that, and we will reuse them wherever we need it. Now, in case you do not yet have a high level of automation in the test area, or you need another repository, or more help on the ALM side, CA has, of course, in its portfolio solutions that you can use in there. But again, that is not mandatory. We can reuse whatever tool set that you are using already. So let's take this a step deeper. How do we achieve that? Well, in the CA release automation product, you start basically by defining and modeling your applications. And this is very what we call application-centric oriented. Now, an application can be a single enterprise application, like an order entry system or well, you know, whatever. But it can also be a group of applications which together serve a particular business purpose, like maybe all of the applications you use in your order entry systems. Yeah? So, or it can even be a project around which you work. But the key thing is you start by setting up that kind of an object. And then for that what you call the application, the next thing that you do is you define the various technology components that that application requires. So, for instance, you might be using a WebSphere application server or a JBoss or a Tomcat server with an Oracle database. You might be using a load balancing technology in the production area from Cisco or from Big IPF5, certain authentication you might need to do, maybe some TIBCO, some BizTalk, you know, all kinds of technologies you use. And so what the platform allows to do is that your experts in each of those technology components, your JBoss expert, your WebSphere application server expert, he or she can design the standard methods of how you do something around such a technology component. So they can set up a method on how you install for the first time a new application in WebSphere, or how you're going to upgrade an existing application, or if ever needed, how do you roll back the version of an application that is deployed in there. And we do that by offering a library, an out-of-the-box library, with a whole list of action types that those people can use to actually design such reusable methods, you know, rather than having to scripting and programming. So we offer a library with plugins, with action types that they can use and configure in a Visio-like environment how certain flows should happen. And you know, then all those flows can actually be combined. You know, the flows from the various technology components can be combined in end-to-end release deployment processes, where you can control which steps should run sequentially, what should run in parallel way. You can orchestrate the tasks that should happen on the database versus the tasks that should happen on the web servers, and you can all model that in end-to-end processes. Those processes will typically start, you know, or also involve integration with one or several repository tools that you have in use, and in order to collect the artifacts that you need. Important is that our technology works across various operating systems, so it means that in a single release deployment operation, you can start off by doing certain things on the web server, which might be running on a Microsoft platform, to then do certain tasks on the database, which might be running on a Solaris platform or a Linux platform. So within a single release deployment operation, you can work across various operating systems. Yeah? So what we then do, so what our customers then do with the various flows and processes that they model around the technology components is they will first and for all, they will start by using this platform to do what they call the release intake process. What we see more often is that organizations have multiple development teams who are all working, well, more or less independent from each other, and creating for parts of the application, they create new releases, new builds. Or you might even have outsourced some of that development to an external company who also delivers then certain releases, and you have to combine that with the releases that your internal teams are delivering. So that's where we start with our platform. We can help, and we do help, in standardizing and verifying that the releases which are being delivered are complete, are structured, and contain the information that they need to contain for us. The second thing then that we do is we help you also in defining, what is now the release of the application that you want to push through that software lifecycle. And so it might be very well when you look here at an application and you say, well, we need to verify or validate if a new version, let's say version 3 of that application is okay. Well, version 3 of the application might actually exist of version 5.8 for one module, let's say for the front end, and contain version 1.1 of the back-end module. And so what we will help you to do is to do that master release management, where you say that is now the release and the composition of all the artifacts that make up that release, and that is what we push into the release life cycle. Yeah? So we're going to collect artifacts from the various sources. We distribute artifacts into an environment, let's say a test environment, which might be a very simplified environment. It might be an all-in-one where all of the technology components are running on a single server. And we do all of the typical pre-deployment tasks, the actual deployment tasks, and also the post-deployment tasks that needs to be done. And so we will validate and verify that the right user context is there is enough disk space, up to stopping services or processes, and then afterwards verifying that everything works properly by, for instance, automatically open up some web pages and try to perform a dummy login into the application to see that the application is working. So we take all of the deployment tasks that are required, pre and post-deployment including. What we can also do is we can actually also integrate with the various test automation tools that are out there. CA offers a service virtualization product, and we also have test automation around that. But we can also integrate with the QTP from HP or Selenium or Fitness or other automation tools that are out there for testing. And we can parse the results from those tools. And if we see that the results are okay, we can, in an automated fashion, we can promote that release that you just installed here in that first environment, and we can then repeat the deployment in the next environment, let's say an acceptance environment. What is very important here is that we will reuse those exact same set of flows and methods on how you do the certain things on the various components, but apply them at runtime on different infrastructure. So we do understand very well, and we allow you to map very well what are the environment-specific settings, which servers, for instance, have what role in an environment for a particular application. And so that is what we bring together at runtime. We have all of the artifacts that the release exists of. We have the methods on how to deploy it, and we bring the environment information into it. What is also important is that we have the possibility here to actually dynamically provision environments. And we have a couple of customers who will, actually, provision a new servers as part of a release deployment process. So we can integrate directly with hypervisors, like, for instance, a VMware or an Amazon, or we can work with Windows Azure. And also CA has a provisioning platform, an application provisioning platform that is called CA AppLogic. And it means that during the release deployment operation, we can first set up dynamically a new environment, spin up, create servers, power them up, get the technology stack installed, and then install the new release on top of it. And when testing is done and everything is okay, we can dynamically, destroy that virtual environment again and repeat the deployment in the next environment. And the concept repeats up to the moment where we go into the production environment, which can be, fully scaled out over multiple data centers with load balancer included. So again, the same methods are used. We take the release snapshot, deploy it in the environment by taking into consideration all the specific environment settings that are around there. So, that is the whole concept that we stand for with the platform. And that allows our customers to, on the first hand, to significantly increase the number of release deployments they can do per month. From a project we did in the UK, this is customer data, we were able to bring them from 10 release deployments they did per month up to more than 4,000 release deployments they are now doing per month for that particular project. Now that number of 4,000 is not the most important. What is important is that this customer now has a platform where development teams can make a change, put that into a release, into a very small release, and get that live very, very fast, where really in a couple of hours later it is running in production. And the advantage of that is that your releases can become very granular, very small. And we all know that the smaller a release is, the fewer dependencies you have, so the less risk you have that something can go wrong. So I think that's a very important achievement that we can do when you embark on the concept of continuous delivery as we stand for it. Yeah. And of course, very important also is that we see more and more customers who have the emphasis on reducing the time it takes between a development team who says, here is that new release, here is that build that you asked for in your change requests, and the time it goes live in production. So this is from another project that we did, where at the start, in average, it took them 13 calendar weeks in the happy flow to take new release through all of the stages in the release lifecycle. We are currently on 1 week that it takes them, and the goal is to go even further into a couple of hours. Yeah. Now, of course, also standardizing around the technology components is of a very high value. If you have technologies in use like JBoss, WebLogic, WebSphere, you shouldn't have a different method of doing things for every application you have in use. You can standardize on 1, 2, or 3 methods on how you actually install, uninstall, upgrade applications in that technology. Now, very important, of course, is that, well, we are an automation platform, and we go up to what we call zero-touch deployment operations, so we really reduce the manual effort it takes there by really automating and orchestrating all of the deployment tasks across all the server roles, with an ultimate goal also to reduce the number of service impacting issues. Now, typically, this kind of projects is not something that you do overnight, and this requires a bit of a transformation. And again, there we have the implementation methodology to help you to take a phased approach for reaching the goals as we are talking here. Yeah. Now, I do want to use a couple of minutes just to explain and articulate a bit more on what we call a release operation, yet another term. Why do we use that word so much? Well, because we believe it's very important to differentiate that the release operation contains much more than just the process automation, which is the how part of how you do a deployment. And of course, that we do it very well, and we have the studio where expert users can design in a Visio-like environment their processes. We have the concept of the manifests, which are driving how the process should behave for a particular release for that application. And as such, we control, how the process executes. So, but besides of the how part that makes up the release operation, we also have that dynamic environment concept, where there is really no hard coding between the processes and the methods itself and the environments where we're going to run them. So your processes are agnostic from the environment, but at runtime, of course, you bring them together. And as I mentioned, we can do dynamic server provisioning, or we can reuse existing physical servers, or in the cloud, we can dynamically compose environments and throw them away again. So that's part of what we mean with release operations. But also very important is that this is not about process automation. This is about a platform that should give visibility to release managers, to change managers, on where a release is in the software lifecycle. And we offer all kinds of features and functions on providing release and artifact management, tracking and tracing capabilities. Also, there is a whole planning and a scheduling engine around that, or you might want to do that from outside of Nolio. So quite a lot of our customers will actually, integrate us directly with their build tool, where if the build process is finished, source code check is done, well, in the post-build scripts, they can talk to our API and automatically call a deployment operation, a deployment template in our platform, and we then run zero-touch the deployment in the first environment in the release lifecycle. And last but not least, there is, of course, the security, not just end-user security, where you can define who can see what in which environment for which application, but also the whole concept of impersonalization, where if a process runs in a particular environment on a certain set of servers, you might have to run that process as a particular technical user on that server. Especially for web application servers, you need to install applications under a particular user context, and so also that is completely, that is not hard coded in your process, but you can actually run that impersonalization, on the servers for the environment as they are relevant. Yeah? So all of these things together, that is why we talk about release operations. Yeah? Now, let's take it a step further. If we look at the platform itself and how we can enable that, we basically have different layers. We talk about the release operation center, which is for the end users more, where a release manager, change manager, he or she can log in and trigger a release deployment. There is then the automation layer itself, which will perform the right tasks on the right component at runtime. And then there is the environment management layer, where you link which server has what role per environment in the release lifecycle. And typically we need to do quite some integrations with other tools that are out there. Like, for instance, we need to integrate with the various repository tools, or with the build tools that you have in use, like the Bamboos, Team Cities, Hudson, Jenkins, etc. And again, those integrations are bi-directional. We can trigger certain things in the build tool, and the build tool can call our platform, to automatically trigger certain actions. If a formal CMDB is in place, we can actually integrate with that in order to retrieve certain environment properties, or in order to know which server has what role in an environment. Now, if that is not the case, well, we can use the environment management module in our product itself. But then again, the environment management module is not a full-blown CMDB. It just contains the information that we need to have in order to automate the deployments. So the blue blocks that you see on here are the typical points of integration that we're going through. So what does this actually mean, or how can we actually bring this all together? So if we look at a particular release deployment, it means that, well, first and for all, when we do a deployment, a release deployment, it means that we need to collect the relevant artifacts that release exists from. Yeah? And so as said, we can get that from all kinds of repositories or directly from the build tools. Of course, we need the instructions. There is no magic here. We still need your experts in the technology to design usable flows on how you do certain things, to set up those standardized methods. But the platform allows you to do that in an agnostic way, such that your experts only need to do that once, and we will be able to reuse those flows and processes across the various environments that you have for that application in use. And as said before, the environments can be provisioned dynamically from various hypervisors. Yeah? And last but not least, quite often you might still have certain things that you do manually today, or some input that is required, or a person who needs to trigger certain scripts on the left and the right. Well, how can we replace that? Typically resides in the heads of the people, or in release notes or whatever, we can capture that into our release manifest concept, and our platform has out-of-the-box support to integrate this kind and use that release manifest data in a very intelligent way, such that all the pieces of the puzzle come together. We understand the release content, we know where to go and fetch the various artifacts, we have the methods on how to deploy it, and we understand the various environments and the environment settings that you have in your release lifecycle. So at runtime we bring that together, and that is how we can do what we call zero-touch deployment automation in a particular environment. And then once we have done it in the first environment, we then have the concepts in place to decide on an automatic or a manual triggered release promotion to the next environment along the release lifecycle path, along the release promotion path. Yeah? So that's an important concept, and this is what we teach our customers on and explain it also in more details. Yeah? So maybe just to give you a quick insight into how the product looks. So basically, when we look at the Release Operations Center, to start from that point, what users get to see is a list of various release templates that they can use. They can, for this application online booking system, they can go in and do an automatic deploy of the latest build. No questions asked. You select an environment, and automatically the deployment of the latest build it is happening. It can also be to do rollbacks or deploy specific versions that you want to deploy in a particular environment. And so from such a template, you then derive your release operations, which are like unique release jobs. In order to deploy a particular version in a particular environment, this can be with or without approval steps. And during such a release deployment, we will collect all kinds of artifacts from various repository systems. And in the platform, we will actually make like a symbolic link, like a reference to each of the artifacts that we use during the deployment operations. And we do that fully automatically we will create like some kind of a fingerprint of each artifact, and we will be able to help you to enforce that the exact same set of artifacts is moved from the one environment to the next environment as you are pushing your release through the release lifecycle. And we provide then all kinds of visibility and reports around that. Like for instance here with my user, I can see 3 different applications that we're running, and I can see the version that we're running of our BLS application in the production, which is version 2.5. We're on version 2.6 in the UAT, and we're on version 3.2 in the integration environment. If things goes wrong during a deployment operation that is visually flagged, we can go in and we can see that we were trying to deploy version 3 in an environment, and you can drill down and see what went wrong where, and you can drill down up to a high level of detail. And again, very important is when you run a deployment of a particular version, like this version 3.0, you can actually see what this is composed of. So version 3.0 from a master release management exists of this version 5.0 on the back end and version 2.8 on the front end. And then again, behind those versions, there are again a whole list of artifacts that are used. Yeah? And these can be made visible as well when we go to the artifact reports. You can see the snapshot of artifacts you have running for an application in a particular environment, where I can see that the front-end pack is on 0.1.2 build 3, etc. I can do that for all the artifact types. Or I can turn around and say, well, show me where a particular artifact version is used. Our build 3 only runs in production, and the build 1051 is running in QA and in the test 1 environment, and you can further click down and see the deployment operation that was used, etc. Now this is all more for the end users, release managers, change managers, where the expert users can set up once set of flows and processes and expose them like a service to the colleagues in the release management teams. Now, well, how do you set it up? Well, that is where you go into the studio. This is what you see here now on the screen. Basically, when you define an application, you start by defining the various technology components, and around each of those technology components, you then configure actions, reusable standard actions, like how do I start in BizTalk, how do I start a BizTalk application, or how do I stop a BizTalk application. You do not need to script that. We offer action types that you can just configure and then reuse them. And so there is a whole library of action types that we ship along with the product, going from very basic things like how you do on how you work with folders and files and user permissions and change mods and whatever you want to do. But it can also be much higher in the application stack, where we have a whole list of actions to automate tasks around WebSphere application server or WebLogic server or Tomcat, JBoss, etc. Of course, you can also do changes on the databases. Yeah? And so with those actions that are configured, you can then create your reusable methods, like how do we, for instance, upgrade an existing BizTalk application? Well, this is the way how you do that. Okay? You use those action types that we offer, that you in the library, configure them, and then you put them together in your flows. Like you say, well, we need to stop the application, and if that fails, well, then I will do something else. And so you can bring it all together in reusable scenarios and flows. Yeah? And with those things, you can then combine, or you can then create what we call end-to-end operations. Like, for instance, a full deployment that I need to do. Well, that would require certain changes that I do on the front end and in parallel on the back end, and then this on the middleware will only start after this is finished on the back end, and this on the back end can only happen if all of the front end servers are fully finished. Yeah? And there are all kinds of things you can configure on here, like when do we go from one server role to the other, so the dependencies and the orchestration around it. And this can then be used in environments to where you can run a deployment operation, for instance here. So here I can see my 4 different environments I have in place for this application. So we can see that we have the test 1 environment, we have a QA environment, and we have a production environment. And this is where we see the environment information, like which servers have what role in that environment. And this, again, these servers can be created on the fly when we run a release deployment operation. I mean, they might not yet exist at the start of the release deployment operation, and that is no problem at all. And this is also where you can see certain placeholders for environment-specific properties, like for instance, if we, like here for the BizTalk, where we need to specify the BizTalk database name that we use in the production environment and the port number that this thing is listening on. And that, of course, is different in production versus when I go to the same type of information of what you can see in the test environment, where we will run with the test database and we have a different port number 888. And so basically when you look in the release operations center and you're running a release operation, what is happening in the background is that from the release of the operations center, actually the various release steps and processes are kicked off automatically, assigned to the servers automatically, and you can define logic for that, and then that is, that process is then running. And you can actually see, a process chart. You can double-click on actions to see their input and output and the result and start times and end times. So you can see visually the execution. You can also look at that server by server, or you can look on an event audit trail where you really have a detailed audit trail type of report where you can see exactly what is happening on which server, etc. That audit trail report is, of course, also available then for, to turn it into a PDF report, upload it to a document server, whatever there. Okay. So, in a nutshell, this is, what you do in the studio. So, expert users will design reusable flows starting from a library with action types that we offer, pulling it together and parameterizing it, and then, use that in the various environments. And of course, the data that is collected can be drill down and see then the environments, and then drill down and go to the categories. So, in summary, that is what the platform is all about. Again, it's all about promoting your releases from one environment to the other, automating that all of the tasks inside a particular environment, and of course then also reducing the time it takes between the various environments. So by integrating with test automation tools and also achieving a high level of automation there. Yeah. So that I think is the content that I wanted to share with you today. You can through the GoToMeeting, through the webinar session, you can ask some questions. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them up there. Okay. And yeah, okay. While I'm looking here at the list of the questions coming up, so just that you know, there's within CA there is a big DevOps initiative going on. We created also a website around that. I know the link is a little bit on the long side here, but so feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions later on. This is my email address, still the Noliosoft one, but it's working. So benny@noliosoft.com. You can then also enroll on the website and become part of the CA community. So we created an online community around this topic. So for us, this is a very important activity that is going on. Okay, I see I have a couple of questions coming in. I think we still have a couple, few more minutes I can spend on that. Question that I have here is this only for customers or for organizations who are on Scrum and Agile methodologies? Definitely not. I mean, even if you are still working in a waterfall method and you go live 2, 3, 4 times a year in production, still then you can realize significant benefits, because it means that if you only go live in production a couple of times a year, then you talk about big releases with many dependencies, and that's exactly where with this platform we are focused on. And so we can automate all of the tasks during such a deployment and in the production area. But also, let's not forget, there is more than deploying in the production. It's fine you go 2, 3 times live in production, but you have all of the deployment iterations that are required in pre-production and in the various CA tool, the CA solutions that we offer, that we can help you with. So from automating on the test side, with virtualizing, the data that you require in your test environments, and so the Lisa service virtualization product. So all of that together is, of course, very much focused on it. But again, even we have a lot of customers who are still applying waterfall methods, so no problem. Okay. Another question here is, well, we have a lot of scripts that we use today. Do we need to replace them all? No, you don't need to replace them. We have an action type in the library that allows you to run scripts, whether it's a shell script or whether it's PowerShell or even scripts that you create in your WebSphere environment, so or WebLogic, so Python, Jython scripts that you use there. We can reuse them in the platform. What we recommend you is that you treat those scripts like artifacts, that you store them in a repository, and that like the release artifacts that you go, the jars and the ears and whatever you pick up from the repositories, that you also check out the right version of the script, distribute it to the server or servers where they need to be used, execute them, and maybe replace some tokens in those scripts, like the right IP addresses and ports and whatever. We can do that automatically, and then execute the scripts, look at the return code that you get, and if everything is okay, throw away those scripts from those servers. Don't leave them out there, that it's not a whole jungle of old and new scripts that are out there. Another question here that I see on the list can we create our own action types? Okay, so yeah, we offer a SDK, a software development kit. So you can actually look at all of the action types that we have created and look at the logic that we use in there, or you can create your own action types and use them in the platform. So from that point of view, those action types are actually a kind of a plugins, and you can use ours that we ship with the product or create your own. We give a guarantee that there is a forward compatibility. So if you do invest in creating a couple of special action types for yourself, you can rest assured that those action types will also run in the future if you upgrade the Lisa release automation platform. Yeah? Another question that comes up here is there a community version available? I assume that with community version you refer to a trial version that could be used. So yes, if you go on site on our website, there is a possibility to download a trial version and play with that. Or you can contact a CA representative, and we organize a formal trial license key for yourself, where we can then also grant you access to some of the training and the knowledge resources so that you get up to speed quite fast. So again, please reach out to us if you have any interest in that. There is definitely the possibility that you can try this out on your own with maybe some remote support if you would need it, or we come on site and help you with it. Okay, yeah, that actually brings me to the end of the session. Alec, having a look at the time, I think I hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Benny. That was great. So thanks everybody for your participation this afternoon. And so just a reminder, if you would like to know more about DevOps in general, we do have a big event in Amsterdam on 14th of November, the DevOps Summit, which is devopssummit.com. We will be making available shortly this webinar as a recording, and we'll be sending you a link. So thank you very much for joining, and good day. Thank you.